Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are going to get started in just about 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I'm Christine Anderson. I am the Anti-Trafficking and Runaway and Homeless Youth Coordinator here at OCFS in the Division of Youth Development and Partnerships for Success. In that role, I serve as the Program Manager for the Safe Harbor New York program, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to day 2 of our 6th annual Anti-Trafficking Summit. And I'm thankful that you are all here with us today. A few quick housekeeping items before we get started. As I'm sure you are aware, Summit is a week-long event. We have sessions every afternoon this week. There is one at 12:30 every day and one at 2 every day but Friday. Your Zoom links for each session were sent out. If you have not received the Zoom link for the session you've registered for, please reach out to one of us and let us know. We will get that to you as soon as possible. If you encounter IT issues with any of the presentations, you can email info@welfareresearch.org and help will be sent your way. We will put that in the chat. If you have an IT issue during the presentation where you still have access, you can type that issue into the chat box and we will do everything we can to help you out in that moment. All of our presentations today are being recorded and they will be posted in HSLC as well as our brand new OCFS YouTube channel in the next few weeks for future viewings. If you have to hop off early or you have staff who couldn't be here today, they will be available for them after the fact. Certificates of attendance will be issued after the summit by request only. It is not a standard procedure. So if you need a certificate of attendance, please send your name and email address to our human trafficking mailbox. I will also put that email address in the chat once we get started. We will not be issuing certificates until all of Summit is complete. This takes us a week or two, so please be patient with us. I promise you we will get them to you. We did not forget about you. Next week, you'll receive a post-summit survey. We ask that you use this opportunity to give us feedback so we can incorporate it into future trainings. We do read the feedback and we do take it into account. So any suggestions you have, we would love to hear them. Lastly, and most importantly, participants are automatically muted upon entry during the presentation. All of our amazing presenters have about 45 minutes of material to share with you. And then there is time at the end for questions and answers. If you have a question or something you'd like to share during the presentation, you can put that right in the chat box. In the bottom right, please make sure it says it's going to host and panelists so we can see it. We do try to ask that you keep your questions until the end, but if you have something you want to share, because otherwise you'll forget, which is what I do, you can type it in there anytime and we will get to it at the end. We were going to take as many questions as we can, keeping in mind our time frame. But if we don't get to your question for some reason today, or you think of something after the fact, we do have access to the chat. We will reach out to the presenters with your question and we will get you an answer as soon as we possibly can. With all of that said, I want to introduce one of today's presenters because she comes with us with an amazing panel. Kaylee Fazier, she is the Safe Harbor Coordinator in Chautauqua County, and she coordinates a trauma-informed systems-level approach to prevention, identification, and intervention of CSEC and child sex trafficking. She is trained in a multitude of treatment modalities and provides trauma counseling at the Child Advocacy Program in her county. On top of all of that, she is a behavioral health counselor at the local chemical dependency program, co-chair of her county's youth board, volunteers with the Girl Scouts, and is a registered yoga teacher. I'm very excited to have her and her panel here with us this year. With that, I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Kaylee Fazier, as Christine said, and I'm the Safe Harbor Coordinator in Chautauqua County. So bear with me for just a moment. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. For some reason, this is not showing up as an option. Hold on just one second. All right, there we go. So we're going to talk to you today about 5 years of Safe Harbor in Chautauqua County, from the startup of our program to our plans for the future. As I mentioned, my name is Kaylee Fazer. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I coordinate our county Safe Harbor program. Also here with me today is Leanna Luca Conley, the Deputy Commissioner of Adult, Children, and Family Services here in Chautauqua County, as well as Candace LeBaron, who's a foster care caseworker with the county and a contracted employee with our Safe Harbor program. And then we also have Jessica McKeever, who's the former Safe Harbor coordinator and the Director of Operations at Conduit Ministries. And we also have an investigator with the Chautauqua County Sheriff's Office who will remain anonymous for the afternoon. So jumping right into it, I thought I would set the stage of Chautauqua County. We have a population of 127,657 folks here in our county, with about 132 people per square mile. Our largest city is Jamestown, followed by Dunkirk. In Chautauqua County, we are New York State's 23rd largest county. We're located in the southwestern corner of New York State along the New York-Pennsylvania border. Chautauqua County is the westernmost of New York's counties. Chautauqua Lake is located in the center of the county, and Lake Erie is our northern border. Per the 2020 census, the racial makeup of our county is 94.04% white, 2.18% Black or African American, 0.43% Native American, and 0.036% Asian. 4.22% of the population in our county are Hispanic or Latino. In Chautauqua County, we have a significant Amish community and a small portion of the Cattaraugus Reservation of the Seneca Nation of Indians. The average median income here in Chautauqua County is $46,820. We're home to the Chautauqua Institution, Lilydale, the country's first natural gas well, location of the first shots fired in the War of 1812, birthplace of Lucille Ball, and lots of other interesting facts here in Chautauqua County. The manufacturing sector provides the base for our county's economy, with important and growing contributions from the retail, service, and tourism sectors. However, farming is an important piece of our county's economic makeup. Chautauqua County has more farms and produces more grapes than any other county in New York State. So that gives you some kind of an idea of what we're talking about here in Chautauqua County. So I'm going to ask you real quickly for our first poll, if you can just identify what type of community do you generally serve, whether that be urban, rural, or suburban. So I think we'll have a poll coming up here. So go ahead if you haven't already done that. Thank you. Looks like mostly rural populations here, a little bit of urban and suburban as well. Thank you for that. So moving right along, our second poll is, in which segment of the community do you wish to enhance relationships? We have here today with us a representative from the faith-based community, from law enforcement, county government, as well as social services. I'm representing mental health in our child advocacy center. So let's go ahead and look at poll number 2 and see, what you are interested in cultivating, and I guess which types of agencies are you hoping to cultivate or enhance your relationships? All right, so pretty consistent across the board, law enforcement and mental health being probably the most significant, and then faith-based initiatives and social services. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to turn this over to Leanna Luca Conley and talk a little bit about the startup of Safe Harbor here in Chautauqua County.
So hi, everybody. So I ended up becoming part of Safe Harbor when I was brand new in my role here as deputy commissioner. And it was interesting to me because I didn't think that we would have any trafficked identified youth. Lo and behold, once we started rolling things out, we were quickly educated on that. But when we, in May in 2016, OCFS had approached us regarding Chautauqua County becoming part of Safe Harbor. And I'm really one for not recreating the wheel. I'm big on seeing what other communities have done who are Safe Harbor communities and kind of learn from their process rather than us, making the same mistakes, because who has energy to continue to do that? So one of the counties that I was already working with and partnering with on many, many levels was Niagara County. So Niagara County was huge in, allowing us an opportunity, where Jessica and I actually went to Niagara County and met with their child advocacy program, who had the Safe program at that time, and kind of learned from them, how they created, this into their county. Sustainability is always a big thing for me because, we always, especially now with COVID, we've gotten all these pockets of money. And when that pocket of money is gone, then usually the program ends. I originally came from the private sector. That's really bad to just end a program, especially when the community, kids and families, really need a program. So always looking at how we can sustain programs as we develop. We also, identified that bringing Safe Harbor into our community, there was going to be a huge educational shift. Really, starting in my department, child welfare, looking at probation and all of the other sectors. Originally, I came from the private sector and oversaw clinics. And I can tell you at that point in time, trafficking was very new to, all those sectors, because here I was in my role, I didn't think we'd have any cases. So just imagine all these other sectors when it came to really assessing the kids and families that they were working with. So we really wanted to start, and actually Kaylee was an intern with me at that time. So it's interesting how things come full circle. So Kaylee's been with Safe Harbor at the very beginning to help roll this process out. But we ended up working with Niagara University for a needs assessment, because we really needed to see where we needed to start in our county. We kind of had an idea, but wanted to really survey the other sectors to see where there was opportunities for us to kind of like seed within those, and how we can really lay a good foundation moving forward. As we really knew what would happen, that survey came back, and it really identified education being one of those areas. People didn't know about the red flags. They really didn't know anything about trafficking and what that was. And really the language around it, how to kind of build it into their sectors to make it stick. And I can give you one of the examples that we did with the Youth Bureau. Was any agency that was getting money from the Youth Bureau, we made sure that part of the process was that agency would get Safe Harbor training to try to shift their culture along with us. So really trying to build that foundation, continue the education, and work with all the different agencies in the community. We also knew that it all stemmed from education. So that's where we looked towards the YWCA at that time. And Jessica McKeever was already working for the YWCA, and she was in schools. So, and I know Jessica will talk a little bit more about that, but that's where we really looked towards, contracting with the YWCA at that time, just because of their, knowledge and relationships that they already had with the school systems. We also identified that we needed tools in place. So, we formed the critical team, which was great. We wanted to make sure that all sectors were around the table, from our federally qualified healthcare center to our hospital system, to having a school representative, mental health, some of our local community agencies, because part of that was also looking at their policies and procedures in place and for them to fully understand what Safe Harbor was. And we would bring in speakers. I mean, law enforcement was part of that because that was still kind of new for them, here in Chautauqua County, and how we could really collaborate and enhance what we were doing, which really resulted in really great conversations and great ideas. A lot of haha moments came out of that with, missed opportunities along with the gaps that we needed to work on, and, really identifying how we could support each other. The other thing with forming the critical team, knowing that we have a lot of different sectors that have their own regulations to follow, and their own procedures in place. So making sure that we give them tools, for them to, for example, with our probation department, along with our child welfare department, to give them tools to understand what the process is when they refer, and moving on from that. Just because there's all these regulations out on what they need to do, they need frontline tools to understand what that process looks like. So those were tweaked multiple times, and we still look at those and review and tweak. But now I'm going to pass it over to Jessica, because I know Jessica will add a lot more to what I just said.
Hi, thanks, Leanna. Like Leanna said, I was employed by the YWCA. I was actually brought on to do Safe Harbor education after the YWCA of Jamestown's Comprehensive Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Program had used some of the seed money from the county to develop a lesson plan on human trafficking awareness. So I started mid-May, and by the time I got going and trained mid-May 2016, by the time I got my training done and was ready to hit the classrooms, we were towards the end of May. So in schools were wrapping up at the end of June. We got in and saw four high school classes, and quickly realized that the lesson that we had prepared and brought to them wasn't giving them the information that they needed. It was a really broad look at trafficking and kind of just awareness raising. But as we started to unpack some of those things there, they were able to take like these bigger global ideas and apply them to situations that they had seen or heard of or been a part of them themselves here in Chautauqua County. And we were kind of unprepared, right, to hear these examples from kids in classrooms in what I hadn't had a taste of what it looked like at the local level yet. So I was kind of taken back. So we quickly took that and expanded and started to look for more appropriate educational curriculums to teach in the classrooms. And we, summer 2016, another community educator and myself got trained in Love 146's Not a Number curriculum, and we hit the ground running the beginning of the 2016-2017 school year. And through that year, we ended up in 13 of our county's 18 school districts providing education primarily at the high school level in health classrooms. That was the primary target. We had some districts that let us in for some English classes or some history kind of elective classes, but our primary in seemed to be our health classes. And about the end of 2016 to the beginning of 2017, because of what we were learning through the feedback from our students and what we had just started to hear from the critical team and those kind of things, Leanna had approached me about taking the coordinator position and started to do some of that data collection and just kind of really taking a deeper look at what trafficking here looked like. All during this time, we are also starting to do training for, like Leanna mentioned, our youth bureau agencies, other people that were working with youth in our community. But our big thing was to start to capture that data. And what we quickly saw was a couple things. One, that the average cases that were being identified weren't high school students, they were middle school students. So our prevention education was reaching our students a little bit too late. And the second was that there was kids that were receiving the information from me in our classrooms. I'd have my attendance sheets, and I'd go back and I'd get a call about a high-risk kid or an at-risk kid. And I'd be like, oh, I feel like that name is a name I've heard before. And it turned out there was a few times where there was a kid that I had in my classroom. So that, I would say that was like mid 2017, where there was a shift in me in realizing what, starting to like understand more of what we needed to do to be effective in our prevention work. And that was to go younger. So at the summit, actually in 2017, we heard about the I Am Little Red curriculum, and we started to implement that as soon as we got our hands on that in early 2018 with middle school students, and that seemed to be pretty effective. I didn't wait to get my hands on that. I had started to do some work using some activities inspired by the Not a Number curriculum, and pulled some of the other stuff from the original lesson plan that we were doing so I could get into middle school classrooms sooner. But found that I Am Little Red curriculum seemed to work and be the most effective with our primarily seventh and eighth graders. But even more than that, we identified that was when trafficking was starting. So we decided to take a look at some evidence-based curriculums for elementary students. So we spent a little bit of time and brought on a couple other employees to start teaching child safety matters at the K-5 age range. That kind of floundered a little bit and stalled out when I went on maternity leave in early 2019. And when I was off on maternity leave, and even prior to this, just based on all of the information that we had started to see and gather, there, like I said, there had started to be a shift in me where I realized that like the way that we were approaching addressing trafficking in our county through the prevention and awareness raising, the education was missing a component that I wasn't equipped or prepared to do. And that was like the more intensive case management and trauma treatment portion. So there was a big part of me that was like, I love the work that I do, but I don't think that I'm necessarily the right person to do it anymore. And so I was of the strong opinion that we should probably transition to somebody who could do that. And that's kind of how, after I stepped out of the role at the YWCA, Kaylee came on at the Child Advocacy Program. And I'll hand that over to her, but Kaylee, if you want to go back a slide, I'll touch a little bit more on some of the other, besides education and trainings that we did, some of the other awareness and outreach activities that we did. If you look over to the picture on the left, some of my coworkers and I did some outreach and awareness raising at our local public market, farmers market, using a tool called the Red Sand Project. It was created by an artist named Molly Gochman, and it is a sand sidewalk installation that kind of draws attention to the cracks and the gaps that you might not necessarily notice, and kind of just helps you start to look for things that you're not noticing, as in red flags and warning signs for human trafficking. So that was a really interesting way to start the conversation with community members that we hadn't necessarily been in contact with before. We were seeing tons of kids, tons of professionals, but we were out in the community doing that that way, and had some really good contacts with people who had some really good ideas or had expertise or connections back to some other resources that we utilized. So that was pretty cool. What you see in the middle is one of, I think there's been 3 window displays with awareness raising information at some storefronts in our county. And then we'll dive a little bit more into some of the ongoing outreach and awareness activities that we've done when we loop back to my second portion, but I'll hand it over to Kaylee now.
Thanks, Jessica. So to kind of pick up what Jessica was saying, as she was doing this awareness raising and the education in the schools, it became really apparent that there was a gap in our program, that there was this need for more intensive case management, more trauma-informed treatment. And I don't know, Leanna, if you want to unmute and jump in at any point, feel free. I know you are kind of the visionary behind a lot of this. But it was determined by the stakeholders and the powers that be that this program moved to the child advocacy program. So if you're not familiar with CACs or child advocacy centers, they are throughout the US and abroad. There's 924 centers in our country, and ours in Chautauqua County is the Child Advocacy Program, or CAP for short. Our mission is to end child abuse in Chautauqua County, and when abuse occurs, CAP coordinates a community response to bring hope, healing, and justice to children and families. We serve all of the county, and we have 2 offices in our most populated areas, in the Jamestown area and the Dunkirk-Fredonia area. At CAP, we conduct forensic interviews, we offer advocacy, trauma counseling, medical evaluations, we provide community and professional trainings, and we coordinate now the Safe Harbor program. Additionally, and perhaps one of the most important parts of our center in regards to Safe Harbor is we coordinate and facilitate the Chautauqua County Multidisciplinary Team for Child Abuse. So I'm going to jump right into talking about that multidisciplinary collaboration, because that's been so key in the success of our program. So at CAP, our multidisciplinary partners in our county include the Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services, the District Attorney's Office, the Chautauqua County Law Department, Chautauqua County Probation, the Jamestown Police Department, Ellicott Police Department, Town of Carroll, Dunkirk, Fredonia, Lakewood, Busti Police Departments, Chautauqua County Sheriff's Department, the New York State Police Department. We also, our other agencies involved in our multidisciplinary team include Catholic Charities, the Chautauqua County Mental Hygiene Program, University at Pittsburgh Medical Center, the Chautauqua Center, the Resource Center, Family Service of the Chautauqua Region, Chautauqua County Victim Assistance Unit, CASA, the ANU Center, Chautauqua Opportunities, the Seneca Nation of Indians, and of course, CAP, our Child Advocacy Program. So all of those partners, I believe there's 24 different agencies. We all have formal signed memorandums of understanding and agreement to share information, work collaboratively on these cases of child abuse, including CSEC and trafficking cases. So bringing the Safe Harbor program over to CAP was awesome, in that we, me as a CAP employee and the Safe Harbor coordinator, am very much involved in our multidisciplinary team. So these CSEC cases are reviewed monthly at our South County case review meeting and every other month at our North County case review meeting. We also have several other small little case conferences throughout. And because everything's kind of located at our center as a hub for the community, we have law enforcement partners co-locating with us. We have mental health professionals from outside of the child advocacy program that co-locate with us. So we are, constantly working in this multidisciplinary atmosphere. We also have expanded on our critical team since the program has moved over to CAP. And our critical team now functions more in the sense of reviewing systemic issues related to trafficking. So what is stopping agencies or preventing agencies from identifying these red flags or CSEC indicators? What are the barriers to reporting? What are the barriers to intervening appropriately in a risk-tolerant, trauma-informed, youth-centered way? That critical team meets quarterly. We do lots of trainings on CSEC and trafficking. We discuss those issues. We talk about areas in the community, different agencies and organizations that would benefit from learning more about trafficking and those kind of things. And then this year, in regards to multidisciplinary collaboration, we are so excited. In 2021, we rolled out our after hours crisis support program for the partners that we work with. So we identified a few of our key stakeholders in regards to these CSEC and trafficking cases, that being law enforcement, child protective services, our youth shelter, our the county's rape crisis and sexual assault crisis advocates, and our federally qualified healthcare center. So with those partners, myself at Safe Harbor and some of our other employees at CAP have we've created different focus groups with all those different multidisciplinary partners that I just named. And we have come up with, we've created service agreements to kind of enhance our already existing memorandums of understanding to kind of delineate exactly what this on-call crisis support program would look like. But more or less to kind of give you a quick rundown, we have 8 staff members at CAP who are part of this on-call rotation. And we are available for those identified partners that I named 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if one of those partner agencies identifies a youth who is at risk for CSEC, we can act right there on the spot as, to try to build in rapport, to engage that youth in services, or, just to provide that warm handoff. You can see pictured on the left-hand side of the screen on the bottom part, there's 3 of us there with masks. I'm on the left side. One of our forensic interviewers is in the middle. And on the right-hand side of that picture is Jen Wilcox. She's a SANE nurse, a nurse practitioner. She works for our federally qualified healthcare center, but she's also a medical director here at CAP. And she is awesome in this after hours program that we've started, in that if one of our partners identifies a youth who is engaged in CSEC or has experienced some kind of commercial sexual exploitation, Jen is available to do forensic exams really any time of day or night, whether that be in one of our hospitals, in one of her clinics, or in one of our facilities at the Child Advocacy Program. So that's something that we're really excited about. So we started that on-call service in August, and we are kind of trucking along and seeing how that goes. In addition to providing those on-call services to those key partners that I mentioned, all of those key partners have received or will be receiving in the next few weeks more intense skills training on trafficking and CSEC, and specifically in how to provide trauma-informed, risk-tolerant, youth-centered services. So we've worked really closely with those partners to do that. So at this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to Candace, who's going to talk a bit more about some of our multidisciplinary collaboration.
Hi, everyone. I am an employee of the Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services. I work as a foster care caseworker, and I also work along with the Child Protective Services. I got involved with Safe Harbor as an intern while I was studying at the University of Buffalo, and I am now a contracted worker for Safe Harbor. It wasn't long into my internship when I realized the advantage of having the dual perspective of the child welfare along with Safe Harbor and the connections that were needed between those two. Not only was I able to bring the education to my department, but I was also able to bring the concerns and questions back to the Safe Harbor table, which allowed Kaylee to see where growth was needed. For instance, prior to working with Safe Harbor as a child welfare worker, I knew about sex trafficking. I knew that it was a pretty new procedure that we did as we opened a case. We had to do a sex trafficking assessment. But looking at that, I, as well as my coworkers, kind of looked at it from a Hollywood perspective, thinking that sex trafficking was when a child was taken and sold across the state line or across country borders, which we rarely ever saw. So once I worked with Safe Harbor and really learned what sex trafficking with children was and was able to educate the department, we suddenly saw a name to and a definition to what we were seeing in our cases. And those assessments became very important to us. It brought awareness that sex trafficking was happening in our county and was escalating at an alarming amount. I realized that when I explained it to people that sex trafficking was actually the sexual exploitation of children by parents or guardians in exchange for drugs, cash, a place to stay. There was not only just sexual acts, but actually exchanging sexual photos of children. So this is something, like I said, that we were seeing at an alarming rate in our cases daily. So by becoming that go-to person in the department where people could come to me and ask questions, and like I said, I could then take some of their questions and concerns back to Safe Harbor, where there are areas of needed growth, where Kaylee could then develop such policies and procedures on how we go about reporting these. That's where the need for the crisis availability came about after hours. The expansion of safe houses for our youth, that's going to be needed. That really bridged a gap for us. And what has continuously created roadblocks in our county is when agencies become compartmentalized. This is what always leads us to stalled progress. So by creating those bridges with the critical team and by building and bringing several different perspectives together, like education and healthcare and law enforcement and human services, together with Safe Harbor, we were then able to broaden our conversations, solve problems, bring awareness, gather concerns, and work at a much faster outcome than when we were just working individually. So Kaylee is now going to talk about direct services.
Thank you, Candace. So in addition to the availability of that instant multidisciplinary collaboration and the growth in that regard, since the program has moved over to CAP, we've also been able to capitalize on our direct service provision. So at the Child Advocacy Program, we have 2 full-time therapists, one who's an LCSWR and an LCSW. I, am as the Safe Harbor coordinator, my time is split between outreach and awareness, training, case management, policy writing and development, and direct service provision. So I do have a small caseload of clients I see for trauma counseling. And then we also have a part-time LMHC that works with us. So we are all trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as problematic sexual behavior, CBT. The 2 LCSWs and myself are trained in EMDR. We have one of our therapists is a certified play therapist. As it was mentioned earlier, I'm also a certified yoga instructor. So I teach trauma-informed yoga here at CAP as part of my therapeutic approach, as well as I facilitate a girls group here where we incorporate trauma-informed yoga. So it's wonderful having these direct services at CAP. So if any of our community partners are identifying a youth at risk for CSEC, when they're referred to me as a Safe Harbor coordinator, I can then take that referral right to my colleagues at CAP and see if that family would be appropriate, if that youth would be appropriate to work with one of our therapists, or we have connections with lots of different mental health agencies in the community. So as I think I mentioned earlier, we do have some mental health therapists from a different agency that co-locate at our center. So we have 2 counselors with Chautauqua County Mental Hygiene that will see both youth and their parents. At our Child Advocacy Center, we don't bill. All of our services are free to families. So the youth, free to youth. So it's really wonderful for us to be able to partner with other therapists that can see parents as well and bill for those services right out of our building. And we have other formal and informal partnerships with different mental health clinics and different mental health therapists throughout the community. We work, primarily with folks that are trained in trauma-informed interventions and truly understand the complexity of CSEC and the traumas that these youth have endured. So I'm going to move right along and hand it over to, I guess it's outreach and awareness. I thought it was time for our law enforcement, but it's not. So outreach and awareness. So Jessica talked a bit about some of the outreach and awareness efforts that she had started in the beginning of the Safe Harbor program. And as I was hired in October of 2019 and just kind of picked up right where she left off and was doing, lots of trainings for I think I was in the schools right away doing some trainings for guidance counselors and social workers. We Candace and I, she came on shortly after my start at the Safe Harbor program, and she and I, along with the law enforcement officer that's going to speak shortly, we collaborated to provide trainings to our federally qualified healthcare center, one of the hospitals in our area. We also did some trainings with the faith-based communities. I provided education to students at our local colleges, SUNY Fredonia and Jamestown Community College, and lots of community-based agencies. But lo and behold, if you remember, I said I started in October 2019, so not long after, March 2020 is when COVID hit. So things kind of went, awry, and we had to reevaluate our plans. So I was excited, we hit the ground running. We had just in January, you can see this middle picture here on the screen with some of our county officials, our county executive, picture there in the middle, Mr. PJ Wendell. He had declared January National or Chautauqua County's Trafficking and Slavery and Trafficking Prevention Month. We had articles in the newspaper. We had decorated a window at another local storefront. But then, as I said, March 2020 hit and we had to reevaluate. So Candace, you're back up if you want to talk about what we did in the wake of a global pandemic to keep our awareness raising efforts going strong.
Right, thank you. During COVID, we really had to come up with ways to continue the outreach. When people became isolated and schools were no longer in person, the danger of child trafficking going unreported escalated. We really depended on the community's eyes and ears to report. So it became even a greater necessity for the outreach. The agencies, Kaylee was able to utilize different outlets such as Facebook. She did live streaming with a minimum, maybe once a week, offering focused discussions with people of the community or sometimes educational talks by herself. She addressed such subjects of trafficking like grooming and the intersection of trafficking and race. She used the Facebook page to post articles and videos that talked about information of red flags, warnings, dangers of internet trafficking, and also how to report. And together, like she said, we worked to offer Zoom trainings. We did both live trainings and pre-recorded, which we offered to the community, to agencies, and to service providers to use. She also utilized local radio spots for public service announcements, which she did both in Spanish and English. And she published some articles in the local newspaper. So eventually, when the weather permitted and broke, we were able to do an outside agenda where we came together at a faith-based location. And that was really a great opportunity because it was in a neighborhood. So a lot of community people did participate, as well as the ones that were invited from service providers and agencies. But with each outreach, we usually get the same response. People are astounded and shocked to know that trafficking does exist in Chautauqua County at such an alarming rate, to realize what it is and that they've probably seen it. And they also want to know how they can help. So that is like a great place where we're starting to grow, to try to take those people who want to help us in the community and find a place for them. And lastly, Safe Harbor was able to host a virtual training for the multidisciplinary team and the critical team in partnership with Fox Valley Technical College. And that was a huge success and a really great opportunity for all of us. Back to you, Kaylee.
Thank you, Candace. I'm going to hand this over to our officer with the Sheriff's Office.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jake. I'm an investigator with the Chautauqua County Sheriff's Office, currently assigned to our Criminal Investigation Division and specializing in special victims cases. A little bit ago, a couple years ago, we had a bunch of cases that came through, and it just struck me as odd, some of these sex abuse or sex offense cases. And I started having a conversation with other law enforcement, and they didn't have any idea of why this was happening either. So I was working with a agent with the FBI out of the Buffalo field office and was talking to him about it. And he said, hey, look, I got an agent up in Buffalo who specializes in human trafficking. I'm going to have her come down and talk with you. So I started this relationship with this FBI agent, and she was able to put in perspective to me what actually human trafficking is. Because in law enforcement for years in Chautauqua County, we failed to recognize what trafficking was, and a lot of crimes went unprosecuted because of that, because we failed in law enforcement to recognize that. So she was able to absolutely like put in perspective what trafficking was. And then that's when the Pandora's box opened into the crimes that were being committed down here in Chautauqua County. I've since been assigned, I'm a member of the Western District of New York Human Trafficking Task Force. It encompasses 17 counties in Western New York. And I'm also assigned as a task force officer with Homeland Security investigations. So now I get to see a wide array of human trafficking all within Western New York. And it works with adult and kid cases as well. But with the kids specifically that we saw here in Chautauqua County is that we have poverty-stricken areas. And with that happening, you have kids that are just pretty much roaming free and do not have certain things that other kids in school have. So we all remember what it was like when we were younger and didn't have the exact stuff that the popular kids had in school. But these kids that are growing up in homes where they don't have a lot of money, basically is they will do things to get stuff. And so we started seeing that and not wanting to chalk that up as just sexual abuse, but be able to chalk that up as to some sort of trafficking as well. But within that, within our law enforcement community and trying to like combat these awful crimes, we had a distrust in law enforcement. And you have a lot of that in the media and everything that's perceived about law enforcement. So we needed to bridge that gap because we had people that were not coming forward and not talking about these crimes that were happening against them. And that's really where the Child Advocacy Program and Safe Harbor played a huge part in that, because especially children, some children at a young age are taught to not trust law enforcement, basically because parents had a bad experience with law enforcement. So we were seeing that a lot where kids were just shutting down. Well, we wanted to start this effort, this collaboration, and we really saw a positive outcome with our cases, with kids wanting to talk about what happened, telling us who suspects were, telling us about other crimes that are going on. And that was huge for us because the services that were offered down at the Child Advocacy Program, along with Safe Harbor, were able to like make these kids open up. And sometimes as law enforcement, we're not able to do that. So we have to rely on our multidisciplinary partners to be able to help us with that. And then in turn, that helps us with our investigations because we obviously want a positive outcome on this too. So we saw this huge turn when we started getting these kids services and counseling and basically getting a safe place for them to come and talk about what happened. So we have numerous cases like this. We had a pretty significant case not too long ago where we had numerous juvenile victims. They needed to be interviewed. Their depositions needed to be taken, forensic interviews. There had to be some testifying involved up in federal court up in Buffalo. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have Safe Harbor and the Child Advocacy Program help us out with that. And it's really nice that they're in the same building together because the communication like helped us to not have to do a lot of running around and playing phone tag, which happens quite frequently. So that case has been a great success and more success for the victims than anything else. We want to make sure that we use a victim-centered approach when we're doing human trafficking cases because first and foremost, our victims are our most important things. The case can come after. We may not have the victim testify right away or come forward right away with what happened, but at least they know who they can contact with Kaylee down at Safe Harbor, anybody at CAP, to be able to come back and say, okay, now I'm ready to talk about it, because we can open that investigation at any time. So it's nice to be able to have that opportunity for people to just say, you know what, I'm not ready now, but here, I might be ready sometime down the road. Totally fine. We want to make sure that first and foremost, the victim is good. I saw too that we have a huge agricultural industry here. So we also have a lot of people from other countries, Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, coming here to work. And a lot of times when they come over the border, parents, usually most of the time single parents, will bring their children with them, because then it's easier to get into the country sometimes. So then they're placed to have jobs in certain farms up here, and then they're easily exploited when that happens by the traffickers. And when that happens, the children kind of fall into the victim of being involved in some sort of sex trafficking. And they don't want to come forward on certain aspects of it because they're afraid that they're going to get deported, because that's what the trafficker tells them. And we were able to have Safe Harbor come in and Child Advocacy Program come in and make sure that they can talk openly about that and their concerns. And hopefully we can get them services too through anything that they have concerns with their documentation here in the United States. When I looked at the poll that you guys took at the beginning of the class, or not the class, but this presentation, I see that 57% of people wanted to better their relationship with law enforcement. That's great, because we in law enforcement want to further our relationships with all sorts of service providers, because like I said before, that helps in our investigation. I'm going to offer a piece of advice to those of you out there. I don't know what the backgrounds are, what job descriptions are for everyone, but if you're having problems with law enforcement getting on board with this, sometimes if you start at the top, it works its way down. So you talk to your local chiefs of police, your sheriffs, supervisors that are working in local departments. We've seen a great amount of positive outcomes from other law enforcement agencies within this county that say, yep, we're willing to work with this. We're willing to get the same outcome that you want. Because in law enforcement, we all want to make sure that the crimes are not going unpunished, that people are getting their voices heard, because we don't want crimes to continue in our area. It doesn't look good for us, for law enforcement, if we just let crimes go untouched. So if you are having issues, start at the top. It usually works its way down. Present a good case to your chiefs, to your sheriffs, and that usually helps out quite a bit. So Kaylee, that's what I got for my part.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Jessica to talk a bit about our collaboration with faith-based communities.
Thanks. So when I left Safe Harbor, I left with the intention of coming on staff for the position I'm currently in at Conduit Ministries. And I was really excited and had talked to my pastors here about just continuing trafficking work in a way that was a little bit less regulated by grant restrictions. And I was super happy with the direction that Safe Harbor was going, and continued to do some work in the transition process with Kaylee. But quickly after I came here, I was introduced to a girls ministry initiative called Brave. And the ultimate end goal of everything that we have done with Brave and our ongoing girls ministry is to prevent human trafficking through empowerment of girls. And we call it Brave because it was the goal was to equip girls to be brave for themselves and for others. So helping them understand how it's okay to how to identify red flags and warning signs, and not just for trafficking, right? We're talking about like self-esteem issues, relationship issues, those kind of things that we all know are some of the things that can lead to girls being more vulnerable to being trafficked. So some of the pictures all of the pictures that you see here are from what we did in fall of 2019, and it was our first Brave event. And essentially it was just a day that my church where I work, Conduit Ministries, led in collaboration with about 12 community partners, including the Department of Health and Human Services, the Sheriff's Department, Child Advocacy Program, and some other organizations in our community, to just love on the girls in our community with an end goal of connecting them to essentially small groups where we know that they would be able to build some relationships and provide them with some of the natural supports they might need to become more resilient. So that was one of the primary things that I've done in collaboration with Safe Harbor since we left. But Candace had mentioned earlier in that awareness and outreach portion, we've done some trainings here at Conduit and are continually willing to partner and plan on partnering in the future. Brave has taken a little bit of a turn as we lean heavily into our groups. And it's just under the title of our girls ministry right now. We're not calling it Brave, but in the process of all of that, we have a lot of early movement on a project that me and one of my Brave co-leads have started to independently work on, but also is a part of a faith-based community with the same sort of end goal of Brave, but a house-based program to provide more of those kind of circle group, small group things, but as well as meet some physical needs for the youth in our community: food, showers, laundry, those kind of things. It's very early, so I'm not committing myself to too many promises here. But I think that one of the things that I wholeheartedly believe, I don't think, this is something that I wholeheartedly believe, is that there are significant gaps in the utilization of the faith-based community here and probably everywhere. One of the things, like I said, that I was most excited about when I came here was that we could approach the things that lead to kids being exploited in ways that I couldn't have done before, like really outside of the box creative ways. And I think that all it takes is one connection with somebody in your faith-based community. So I did a lot of work when I was at Safe Harbor, kind of as being, I tried to do a lot of that in like January Human Trafficking Awareness Month. I tried to host a faith-based community training, invited faith-based leaders from all different faith backgrounds to a training, and it wasn't super successful. So I think that it might start for people finding that one person in the congregation. I'm super thankful that when I came on board here, I had some pretty significant support from some people who really understood what was going on in the community trafficking wise, and that partnership mattered. So I would just encourage you to continually reach out to people that you might know, like your natural support systems, and kind of just start to equip them with what it looks like where you are, and what we know works for prevention, right? Like connecting kids to their natural support systems to help them start to build resiliency.
Thank you, Jessica. So as we wrap things up here, just to kind of touch on some of our milestones over the past 5 years, we talked about a lot of the events and initiatives that have led to this, but we are proud to say that we've trained, and this data, or these numbers are as of October 1st, so just 3 weeks ago. We've trained 2,246 professionals in Chautauqua County to identify the red flags of trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, to report and to intervene appropriately in a trauma-informed, risk-tolerant, youth-centered way. We have had 172 kids referred to our program for some kind of case management or other services. Of those 172 kids, 33 of those youth met the federal definition of child sex trafficking, and 111 youth are considered to be at a high risk for commercial sexual exploitation. So in addition to just those numbers, I'm really, I always harp on this, and I'm so proud of the multidisciplinary collaboration that we've cultivated over the years. As hearing from Jessica and Leanna of the early days, and what Jessica just said right now, I think is so important, is just leaning on those natural supports in your existing networks, and how, the five of us at this, on this panel today have really done that, have really worked tirelessly to spread this word and this message within our own networks. And that has, I think, truly led to our success in building awareness about this issue in Chautauqua County and being able to serve 172 youth. So I'm going to pass this off to Leanna once again to talk about some of our lessons learned and maybe some challenges and opportunities for growth.
So I know I want to talk about some of the strengths too, because I'm big on that, but really looking at, having some really key, strong leaders to champion this. And I can't tell you, between Jessica, Kaylee, Candace, and Jake, much needed in our community to carry this forth. We wouldn't be where we're at without those key champions to keep going. Some of the things that we have all learned along the way is I talked a lot about sustainability, but it's not just with money, it's about human capital. So, really looking at, we invested in having one person, kind of rolling out Safe Harbor. I know, Jessica, we had a couple other people that we added as far as the educational piece. But I think what really needed to happen was having one person that was focused on working with the agencies on policy development and procedures, and then the other person with the educational piece. And then having some support people, probably those key champions from all those different organizations from our MDT, to be able to keep moving that forward. When we first went down this road, because I'm originally from the private sector, new to government, a lot of the Safe Harbor communities were pretty much just kind of in keeping it in government hub. And I just, I want fair warn people that you need that flexibility. Sometimes bureaucracy doesn't give you flexibility. You need to be able to be very flexible with the community needs, having after hours type of situations, to kind of think outside the box, and be neutral in a sense to be able to work with other agencies. The other thing is, because I know how busy these other sectors are, really need to work with those agencies on developing this in their own procedures and policy. It's not going to stick unless we kind of like hand walk support them through this process of making it part of their assessment, their electronic record, identifying red flags, to also, putting it into their training policies as new people are oriented, or their yearly trainings to keep it fresh in their head about the red flags and, really observing these youth and families that are coming in. Originally, when we went with the YWCA, we created our own, critical team, which, everybody has meetings, and it was a lot of times it was the same people around the same table at different meetings. And I think, to look back on that, what we should have done was combine it with the MDT like we do now, because that's already existing. You already have people invested, and those are really the people that are going to champion this forward, because it's really about trust and relationships and to keep this going. But really, the flexibility piece has helped us immensely, because we can, change it as we go forward. I always have tons of ideas. I know Kaylee and Jessica and Candace always throw different ideas around. And then just making sure that we have, that sustainability piece as far as that human capital, because, there's a lot going on in our community, especially now, as COVID and things have opened up, we're seeing a lot more stuff happen. But Candace, I don't know if you want to add to that, because I see you're on here as well.
What I'm going to talk about is where we are now as far as our goals and where we hope to move towards in the future. So the goals that we're currently working on right now is Kaylee is focusing on completing the skills training with the law enforcement. That was a little delayed with the COVID restrictions. So she's once again getting ready to provide in person when it's available or implement a Zoom training specific to law enforcement. She's also currently working with UPMC, which is a major healthcare provider in our area, to create CSEC and trafficking learning modules that will be required trainings for all the clinical staff. So that's huge. That's an amazing accomplishment. Also, Kaylee and I are forming a Safe Harbor Department of Health and Human Service focus group that's going to meet to review policies and identifying child sexual exploitation indicators and developing protocol for responding in a risk tolerant and trauma-informed youth-centered way. We're working with the Department of Health's Staff Development Coordinator to enhance the trainings in the Department of Health and Human Services. And Kaylee has recently met and contracted with a film producer to upgrade our recordings, which is something I definitely need. She doesn't, but so we're really excited about that. And we intend to upload the pre-recorded trainings on the Child Advocacy Program website, which would provide agencies links to view when requesting the commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking trainings that they could use as needed. So what's next? If and when we have time and funding, we would love to establish a similar program for adult survivors of commercial sex exploitation and trafficking, building off of our already well-established critical team. The majority of the cases I'm seeing in child welfare, there's definitely a link between substance abuse and trafficking, and it's growing. So we definitely need a place for the adult survivors, because as we all know, not only do we have to heal the trauma from the adverse effects of the trafficking on the adults, but it's also to prevent further trauma to the children, which we know can be passed on. We have to be able to assist the entire family. We also want to expand the Safe Harbor team. We'd love to be able to include a licensed therapist that's trained in trauma treatment, dedicated to working with commercial sexual exploitation of children and trafficking survivors. One of the issues we have is living in a sprawled rural area. It creates a huge barrier to many of our youths that are in need of services. Not only do we have a limited number of youth resources, especially for youth in crisis, but we also are limited with transportation. So we're looking towards finding ways to expand services to youth. I know that Jessica is working on that by possibly providing like youth drop-in centers, also working on developing an online QR scan that they could use on their cell phones to help the youth to navigate more easily through the system to find specific services they need. And lastly, we're looking forward to expanding trainings. We are looking into working with service providers that go into homes, like installations, home service repairs, food service deliveries. Also, we'd love to move towards trainings with the legal department with concentration on the family court system. So we're very excited about all those.
Thank you, Candace. So we have lots of hopes and dreams for the future, and we could probably go on for another hour or so talking about the different ideas we've had, but those are just some of our hopes and wishes. And that pretty much concludes our presentation for the day. My contact information is on the screen now. If you would, and we're going to have time for questions, and Christine, I think we'll be back on for that. But should you want to connect with me or to one of our presenters specifically, please feel free to jot down this information or take a quick picture of the screen. You can call me or text me or email me, and I'm happy to provide you with that information or link you to one of the panelists. And I'm gonna, I'll leave that up for just a second, and then I'll stop sharing my screen, and I think we'll go over to questions.
Thank you all so very much. Before I get cut off because of time, I want to make sure I extend my gratitude to Kaylee and Leanna and Jessica and Candace and their law enforcement participant. This was so wonderful. I think I learn something every time I meet with all of you. Like, who knew Lucille Ball was from Chautauqua County? Trust me, I did pull other things from that, but who knew? We do have some comments and questions in the box, so I'm going to dive right into that. You have some very positive feedback. They love the CBT and somatic approaches and the use of animals, which I also love. We know that pet therapy is amazing for young people. The first question we have is, are there collaborations or partnerships with area organizations who specifically work with immigrants or farm workers?
So
Yes.
I didn't realize there was going to be enough time for questions, but I did put in the chat that one of the agencies that works with this population is our Community Action Agency, Chautauqua Opportunities. So, just working with a lot of those, partners to make sure that we're outreaching. And Kaylee, if you wanted to add.
Sure. I was just to go on that, our migrant outreach program is part of Chautauqua Opportunities. So we work with them, and we also partner with the International Institute out of Erie County of Buffalo, and work with them as far as visas, if attorneys are needed, those kind of things.
Great. I'm going to move on. I'm going to skip one question and go to the other one, just because I know this is a question I get a lot. How were you able to get schools to buy in and allow you to do groups there? I know that your county specifically has been very successful in that, and we have found that that is something many other counties seem to not struggle with, but have trouble getting the buy-in. So if you guys could speak to that a little bit, that would be great.
Well, I will start and then I'll have Jessica add to it. You don't want to, you want to start with the people that already have a relationship with the school. So the YWCA was already in the schools. I didn't want to add another agency to reintroduce. I mean, schools are busy, we know that. So they already had trust and relationship around the schools. So we utilize that leverage. It all stems through relationships. But Jessica, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure. When I started the community education portion, it was like Leanna just said, at the YWCA, and what they were doing prior to hiring me was all comprehensive adolescent pregnancy prevention work. So they had established relationships with 4 school districts in the county, but even just being able to say, like, we've been in these schools, like, this program it has been tested, and that was helpful. But I also kind of took the curriculums that we were teaching and created some, like, marketing around it. I don't know what else to call that, and did some really loose curriculum alignment, and looked at what we'd be teaching and how that might work with what they would need to accomplish in the classroom. So what we found was, like, oh, I don't have to teach this if you do this. So come in the week before Easter break, so I don't have to teach for 3 weeks, right? And I didn't care. I didn't care because I just wanted to be there to talk to the kids and get that information to them. But really, I do think it was the way that we marketed it, like I said, for lack of a better term, but sold that idea to them that there was stuff that we are going to be talking about that were actually, like, would help the teacher as well. And we, like, the teachers I think were probably actually more blown away than most of the students, right? Like, our kids are getting a lot of information from a lot of places and seem to be a little bit more up on it. And I just remember, like, watching teachers be like, I can't believe what we're seeing. But then also we utilize the ICE 8 initiative for through our BOCES program. And I went on a fairly regular basis to talk to them. They have different cohorts, different teams. There was times when all of the health teachers were there. So I would go and start to give those teachers a little bit of information. I also reached first to guidance counselors, social workers, asked if I could come in to do like their superintendent day trainings and those kind of things. And then after they got the staff got the information, they were a little bit more willing to let us come in to do some student education.
Great. Thank you so much.
No
I think myself included, I would never have thought BOCES, which is strange because that's how you connect with multiple school districts at one time, not just a one-on-one relationship. It really gives you that collaborative build. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
You spoke of programs for females. Do you guys have programs for either that are designated specifically for males and or LGBTQ youth? There's a couple other questions that go along with that, but we'll start with that.
So I think specifically, I had mentioned that we have a girls group at the Child Advocacy Program. We have had boys groups in the past and groups more focused towards the LGBTQ community. We just kind of rotate through our different populations based on the needs of our clients and the availability of our staff. So right now we're working on girls group programming, but those other things are other different segments of the population have certainly been rotated through at CAP. And Jess or Leanna, if you want to speak more on that.
Sure. I get that question often because I talk about that as a girls ministry. And as I continue to do some program development, I'm headed in the other direction, on the other side of that, I get the question like, but what about the boys? From the type of work that I'm doing, I haven't had what I say to them all the time is like, I don't know that I'm the right person to build the relationship in the way that, that we hope to with a boys population. So what it is on our part, when I continue to talk about girls ministry, I would love for there to be a boys ministry or boys programming in the same way, but I'm not the right person to lead it. And we haven't found someone willing to take that on yet, but it is something that I continue to lean into in hope. That is one of my hopes and dreams for the work that I'm doing going forward.
Wonderful. There's a specific question about your ability to work with the Amish community in your area and what that looks like.
So, I mean, we're Health and Human Services. So what that means is we have the health department combined with social services and child welfare. So we continuously work with the Amish community through our public health departments, and along with our child welfare, because we have a lot of Amish that are certified foster care parents. So, yeah. So, I mean, there is that ongoing communication and education, whether it's public health or child welfare. So there's continuous outreach, to that population, but we have probably, I want to say maybe 8 Amish families that are certified foster care parents for us.
That's very fascinating to me. Okay, 2 more questions that are in the chat right now. Are there trainings on trafficking that you would recommend for staff who are just getting started on setting up safe harbor programs in their county?
I mean, I feel like Jessica, you probably, have ideas. I always reference Christine, the OCFS website. You also send out a monthly newsletter that has a multitude of trainings. I host, which I don't think we mentioned, I do a reoccurring Zoom training the 3rd Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. where I just do a basic, this is what trafficking looks like in Chautauqua County. So invitation for that is sent out to service providers throughout the county on a regular basis. And I have just different folks hopping on. So if you want information about that, please reach out to me. But I think OCFS has a wealth of trainings.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
I think that identifying and supporting survivors of C-sec training, like going through that, I know that that's a train the trainer where you go to be able to train other people, but I think that just going through that did really help. When I took that did that as a train the trainer. I had one of our other staff members who went through it with me, and she was fairly new. And she continually talked about how that was so helpful to her in her understanding too. So I think that that's a good tool.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback off of that since that's our training. It's currently right now, if you are looking for that training, not the train the trainer, just the regular identifying part 1 and 2 training, you can just reach out to your local regional office and they have staff who is available to train it virtually right now. So you just, if you need that information, just reach out to me and I'll get you that person's contact. We have another question. I'm just learning about all of this. When you get referrals, how do you get the buy-in from the parents or guardians who are very skeptical or involved in the problem? That's a great question. Thanks, Andrea.
Well, I mean, I can start it. It's really looking, there again at building and establishing that relationship and trust and who that best entity would be. It's not always child welfare because of the situation, but Kaylee, I know you can add to that.
Yeah, I think exactly that. It's finding that right person. And so oftentimes, so say hypothetically CPS, Child Protection, refers a case to Safe Harbor. I've never had any communication with this family. They're already up to their ears annoyed with CPS being at their house. They don't want to hear from me that CPS referred. So in conversations with a CPS worker and utilizing our multidisciplinary team, who else knows this family? And very recently we had a case who a name was mentioned. He's like a homeschool coordinator with one of our public schools. And he was just mentioned as someone who this youth used to see on a regular basis years ago in school, but had a great relationship with him. So we were able to get him involved in these conversations and utilized him to bridge that gap between the family and our team that was working on that. So it's really comes down again to those relationships and knowing the players in your community who can be, cheerleaders for this program and for the families that we serve.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if is our law enforcement professional still with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, I couldn't see on the screen, so I just quick question for you. And this is just more feedback that I hear from our folks in the field, is they struggle, some, not all, with 2 parts of their relationship collaboration with law enforcement. One is getting the buy-in to begin with. And I know you said start at the top, so that's great feedback to bring back to them. And the other is, I'm trying to think of the right way to word this. They are asked to come give this training to the law enforcement professionals, whether they be new officers, it's every couple of years they have to take it. And there's really not a lot of engagement, meaning I'm here at this training because I was told I have to be, but I don't want to be. So therefore, it is not necessarily as beneficial as it could be if the officers were engaged. And again, it's not all of them. That I always tell them, if you can get one, because it's better than none. But how do you suggest they handle those things, or what do you think is the best way, other than just being resilient and persevering and keeping up the good fight, I guess?
Sorry, I had myself muted.
That's okay.
That's actually a really good question, and that's like the age-old question with law enforcement. Like I said, I'll be coming up on my 16th year now, and it's hard. I mean, law enforcement's a hard community to like break into with certain kind of things. We in our jobs are just, you see a lot of things, and sometimes you can get skeptical about certain issues within your job. I think that sometimes with having people come in and talk with law enforcement, sometimes it's almost on a peer level. So sometimes law enforcement speaking to law enforcement is probably the best outcome on certain things. If you can find anyone in your area that wants to do this human trafficking investigations, which are really difficult to do, and really has a desire to train other law enforcement. I think that's really big. Sometimes checking with local academies in your jurisdiction, because each state in New York State has a zone, a training zone that recruits have to go to get trained to become law enforcement officers in New York State. And within that law enforcement academy, they have to have a certain block designated for human trafficking. That's DCJS requirements. So someone in your zone law enforcement academy is teaching human trafficking to the recruits in that academy. So it might even be just reaching out to whoever that zone training coordinator is running the academy and saying, this is what we'd like to do. We'd like to have someone come in and we can partner with them and talk to certain law enforcement groups at like in services and just talk about human trafficking. Do you have anybody that can do that? I know it's a really hard, that's a really hard area to break into, but I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. When I first started doing trafficking, I was getting a ton of kickback from my peers in law enforcement that they didn't believe that it happened, especially with adults. It was just prostitutes doing things for drugs. And you have to kind of dive in a little deeper than that. And it's like, no, there's an underlying problem here. People are exploiting people's weaknesses in order to gain something for themselves. And that in whole is what trafficking is. Like you're using a person to reap the benefits and you're not doing any of the work to get any of those benefits. So I think once law enforcement's eyes started opening to that, they started changing their tunes, at least around here in Chautauqua County. They've changed their opinions on that, which thankfully that's worked. But sometimes just a peer-to-peer like group on it would probably be the best outcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think, again, that's something that many of us may not have thought of is, I think our gut is to go to our local precinct or to our county police or our county sheriff or our town police or what have you. And we don't think about how they actually get to that spot, right? It's like going into the schools. It's essentially a very similar pathway. So thank you so much. We are just about at the end. So again, I want to give my extreme gratitude to Kaylee and Leanna and Jessica and Candace and our law enforcement officer for an amazing panel discussion today. I am always impressed by your creativity and all the amazing work you all do every day. And thank you for joining us. And if you're ready for round 2, we're starting at 2:30. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.